The afternoon sun was beating down on Maple Street when 15-year-old Zoe checked her phone for the third time. Her best friend Kira was driving them back from the mall, and they were almost at Zoe's house. The music was playing softly, and both girls were talking about their plans for the weekend when they noticed the police car behind them. "I wasn't speeding," Kira said, glancing in her rearview mirror. She had only gotten her license 6 months ago and was always careful to follow every rule. The speed limit on this residential street was 25, and she had been going exactly that. The police car's lights started flashing. Kira's hands tightened on the steering wheel as she carefully pulled over to the curb. Both girls had been through driver's education and knew what to do, but it still felt scary. This was Kira's first time being pulled over. "Just stay calm," Zoe said quietly. "You didn't do anything wrong." Officer Morrison stepped out of his patrol car and walked toward them. He was a big man with a stern face, and he didn't look friendly. Instead of approaching the driver's side window like most officers do, he walked around to get a good look at both girls first. His expression changed when he saw them. Kira rolled down her window and placed both hands on the steering wheel, just like they taught in driver's education. "Good afternoon, officer," she said politely. Morrison didn't return the greeting. Instead, he bent down and looked into the car, his eyes scanning both girls and the interior. "License and registration," he said curtly. "Yes, sir," Kira replied, reaching slowly for her purse. "May I ask why you stopped us?" "I'll ask the questions here," Morrison snapped. He took the documents and studied them for much longer than necessary. "What are you two doing in this neighborhood?" The question caught both girls off guard. This wasn't the kind of question officers usually asked during traffic stops. Kira looked confused. "We're going to my friend's house, sir. She lives right down the street." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "Is that right?" "Which house?" Zoe pointed toward the end of the block. "The blue house with the white shutters. My family has lived there for 8 years. 8 years, huh?" Morrison's tone was skeptical. He walked back to his patrol car, taking much longer than normal to run the license. The girls sat in uncomfortable silence, watching him in the side mirror. When he returned, Morrison wasn't alone. His partner, Officer Chen, had arrived as backup. This made Kira even more nervous. Why would they need 2 officers for a simple traffic stop? "Step out of the vehicle," Morrison ordered. "Excuse me?" Kira asked. "Why do we need to get out?" "Because I said so. Both of you out of the car now." Zoe felt her heart racing. This wasn't normal. She had seen enough traffic stops to know that officers don't usually make people get out, unless something serious was happening. "Officer, can you please tell us what this is about? We haven't done anything wrong." Morrison's face hardened. "Are you questioning my authority?" "I said get out of the car." The girls exchanged worried glances but complied. They stood beside the car while Morrison began looking through the windows, shining his flashlight into the back seat even though it was broad daylight. "I'm going to search this vehicle," Morrison announced. "Search it for what?" Zoe asked. "We haven't done anything illegal." "Drugs," Morrison said bluntly. "We've had reports of drug activity in this area, and you two fit the description." Kira's mouth fell open. "Drug activity? We're just teenagers going home from the mall. Look, you can see our shopping bags right there." Morrison ignored her and continued his inspection of the car. "You have the right to refuse the search," he said in a mocking tone. "But that would just make me more suspicious. Innocent people don't usually refuse." Zoe knew this was wrong. She had learned about constitutional rights in her civics class, and she knew that police needed probable cause to search a vehicle. Shopping while black wasn't probable cause. "Officer, I need to call my mother." "No phone calls," Morrison said firmly. "This is an active investigation." "An investigation of what exactly?" Zoe's voice was getting stronger. "You pulled us over and haven't told us why. You want to search our car but won't say what you're looking for. This isn't how traffic stops are supposed to work." Morrison turned to face her fully, and his expression was not pleasant. "Listen here, little girl. I don't need some teenager telling me how to do my job. Your attitude is making me think you've got something to hide." "I don't have anything to hide," Zoe replied firmly. "But I do have rights. My mother works in law enforcement, and she taught me to always ask for badge numbers and to know my constitutional rights." This made Morrison pause for a moment. "Your mother works in law enforcement? Doing what, parking tickets?" "Actually, she's a federal magistrate judge," Zoe said clearly. The words hung in the air for a moment before Morrison started laughing. It wasn't a friendly laugh. It was the kind of laugh that made Zoe's cheeks burn with embarrassment. A federal judge? Morrison repeated, still chuckling. Let me guess, your dad's the president and your grandmother's the Queen of England too? Officer Chen looked uncomfortable.
Morrison, maybe we should just— No, this is good. Morrison interrupted, his voice getting louder.
We've got ourselves a little storyteller here. Federal judge. That's a new one. Usually they claim their dad's a lawyer or their uncle's a police chief. More neighbors had started to notice the commotion. Mrs. Patterson from across the street had come out to water her plants, but she was clearly watching the scene unfold. Mr. and Mrs. Kim from next door were peeking through their curtains. I'm not making this up, Zoe said, trying to keep her voice steady. Judge Patricia Williams is my mother. She works at the federal courthouse downtown. Morrison wiped fake tears from his eyes.
Oh, this just keeps getting better.
Judge Patricia Williams. Jen, did you hear that? We're in the presence of royalty here. Kira stepped closer to her friend. Zoe, maybe we should just let them search the car so we can go. No, Zoe said quietly but firmly. This is wrong and we shouldn't have to put up with it just because we're young and black. Officer Morrison, I'm asking you again for your badge number. Morrison's laughter stopped abruptly. My badge number? You think you can intimidate me with that federal judge story? I've been doing this job for 15 years, kid. I've heard every story in the book. It's not a story, Zoe replied. And when my mother hears about this, she's going to want to know exactly which officer decided to harass her daughter for driving through her own neighborhood. Harass? Morrison's voice rose. I'm doing my job. This is a high-crime area. Zoe looked around at the well-maintained houses, the manicured lawns, and the luxury cars and driveways. High crime? This is one of the safest neighborhoods in the city. Don't get smart with me, Morrison warned. Keep talking and I'll find something to arrest you for. The threat hung heavy in the air. Both girls knew that Morrison had the power to make their lives very difficult, even if they hadn't done anything wrong. But Zoe also knew that giving in to bullies only made them stronger. I want to call my mother, she said one more time. Morrison shook his head, still smirking. Sure thing, Your Highness. Call your federal judge Mommy. I'm sure she'll drop everything to come save you. He had no idea how right he was. Officer Morrison walked back to his patrol car with Kira's license and registration, still chuckling to himself about Zoe's claim. He took his time running the information, occasionally glancing back at the two girls with an amused expression. When he returned, he had his phone out. Chen, you've got to hear this, Morrison called to his partner. He held up his phone like he was recording. Tell my partner here about your mother, sweetheart. Zoe felt her face get hot, but she kept her voice steady. Judge Patricia Williams serves as a federal magistrate for the Northern District. She's been on the bench for 7 years. Morrison's laughter got louder. 7 years. She's got all the details worked out, doesn't she? Chen, in 15 years on this job, how many kids do you think have told me their parents were judges, senators, or police commissioners? Officer Chen shifted uncomfortably. Morrison, maybe we should just finish up here. No way, Morrison interrupted. This is educational. I want to teach these girls about the consequences of lying to police officers. He turned back to Zoe. You know what happens when people lie during police investigations? It's called obstruction of justice. Kira grabbed Zoe's arm gently. Just stop talking, she whispered. You're making it worse, but Zoe couldn't stop. She knew she was right, and she knew this whole situation was wrong. I'm not lying. My mother graduated from Harvard Law School. She worked as a prosecutor for 8 years before President Obama appointed her to the federal bench. You can look it up. President Obama. Morrison slapped his knee.
Oh, this just keeps getting better.
Did you hear that, Chen? Not only is her mommy a federal judge, but President Obama personally appointed her. By now, more neighbors had gathered. Mrs. Patterson had stopped pretending to water her plants and was openly watching. The Kim family had come outside entirely. Even some people Zoe didn't recognize had started to slow down as they walked or drove by. Morrison noticed the audience and seemed to enjoy it even more. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced loudly, we have a real celebrity here. The daughter of a federal judge. I bet you all feel honored to be in such prestigious company. Zoe felt tears starting to form in her eye. Yes, but she refused to let them fall. She had been taught never to cry in front of bullies. Officer, I just want to call my mother. That's all. Oh, you want to call your mother? Morrison pulled out his own phone mockingly. Should I dial the White House? Maybe she's having lunch with the president. Officer Chen walked over to Morrison and spoke quietly. Look, man, maybe we should just let them go. They're just kids and we don't have any reason. Morrison's voice got sharp. These two are clearly up to something. Driving around an expensive neighborhood making up wild stories about federal judges. If that's not suspicious behavior, I don't know what is. Mrs. Patterson couldn't stay quiet anymore. She walked closer to the group. Excuse me, officer, but I know this young lady. She does live down the street with her mother. Morrison turned to face the older woman. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back. This is police business. I'm just saying I've seen her mother dropping her off and picking her up from school. She's a very professional-looking woman who drives a black car with government plates. Morrison's expression darkened. Ma'am, I won't ask you again. Please return to your property. Mrs. Patterson looked like she wanted to say more, but she reluctantly backed away. However, she didn't go inside. She stayed on her lawn watching everything. Morrison turned his attention back to the girls. Where were we? Oh yes, your federal judge mother. Tell me, what courthouse does she work at? The federal courthouse on 5th Street downtown. Zoe answered immediately. Morrison shook his head in amazement. She even knows the address. Impressive. Tell me, what kind of cases does your mother handle? Mostly preliminary hearings, search warrant applications, and detention hearings, Zoe replied without hesitation. She also handles some civil matters and oversees discovery disputes. For a moment, Morrison's smile faltered. These weren't the kind of details a teenager would make up. But he quickly recovered. Very good. You've obviously spent time researching this, probably planning to use this story the next time you got in trouble. Officer Chen was looking more and more uncomfortable. Morrison, she knows a lot of specific details. Maybe what? Maybe I should believe that this teenager's mother is really a federal judge. Come on, Chen, look at them. Does this look like a federal judge's family to you? The racist implication in Morrison's words hung in the air like a bad smell. Several neighbors who were watching looked shocked. Mr. Kim shook his head and pulled out his own phone. Zoe felt her anger building. What exactly is that supposed to mean, Officer Morrison? You know exactly what it means, Morrison replied coldly. Federal judges don't live in this neighborhood, and their kids don't drive around in old Honda Civics. Actually, Kira spoke up for the first time in several minutes. Federal judges live all over the city, and this car belongs to my family. Zoe's family has a different car. Morrison rolled his eyes. Oh, now the other one's talking. Let me guess, your parents are Supreme Court justices? No, sir, Kira said quietly. My dad's a plumber and my mom works at the grocery store. Now that, Morrison said, pointing at Kira, sounds believable. Working class family, modest car, honest answer. But your friend here thinks she can impress me with fairy tales about federal judges. Zoe pulled out her phone. I'm calling my mother right now. Morrison stepped forward quickly and snatched the phone from her hands. No, you're not. This phone could contain evidence. Evidence of what? Zoe demanded. We haven't committed any crimes. Possession of controlled substances for starters, Morrison said. Plus whatever else we find when we search this vehicle thoroughly. You can't take my phone without a warrant. Zoe protested. Morrison laughed again. Watch me, federal judge's daughter. Your phone is now evidence in an ongoing investigation. Officer Chen looked extremely uncomfortable now. Morrison taking her phone might be what, Chen? Legal? Because it is. We have reasonable suspicion of drug activity, and cell phones often contain evidence of drug deals. What reasonable suspicion? Zoe asked loudly. You haven't seen any drugs. You haven't smelled any drugs. You haven't seen us do anything illegal. You stopped us for no reason and now you're making up crimes. I'm making up crimes? Morrison's voice got dangerous. Are you accusing me of lying, little girl? The situation was spiraling out of control, and everyone watching could feel it. Mr. Kim had his phone out and appeared to be recording. Mrs. Patterson looked worried and kept glancing toward Zoe's house. Morrison began opening the car doors and searching through the interior more aggressively. He pulled out the girls' shopping bags and dumped the contents on the ground. Clothes and makeup scattered across the sidewalk. Hey, Kira protested. Those are our things. Evidence, Morrison said firmly. He continued searching, becoming more and more frustrated when he found nothing illegal. He checked under the seats, in the glove compartment, and even in the spare tire well. Zoe watched in horror as her personal belongings were scattered on the pavement. This is harassment. This is racial profiling. And when my mother finds out about this, When your mother finds out? Morrison interrupted. Your imaginary federal judge mother? The one who doesn't exist? She exists, Zoe said firmly, and she's going to be very interested in hearing about Officer Morrison, badge number 4772, who thinks he can bully teenagers because of the color of their skin. Morrison stopped searching for a moment. Did you just memorize my badge number? Yes, I did. I've also memorized your partner's badge number and your patrol car number. My mother taught me to always pay attention to details when dealing with law enforcement. For the first time, Morrison looked slightly uncertain, but his pride wouldn't let him back down now, especially with all these neighbors watching. Your mother taught you a lot of things for someone who doesn't exist. Judge Patricia Williams, Northern District Federal Court, appointed by President Obama, confirmed by the Senate. 7 years on the bench, Zoe recited. Should I keep going? I can tell you about her law school awards, her previous cases as a prosecutor, and her published opinions. Morrison stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to the growing crowd of neighbors. Does anyone else want to hear more stories from our little novelist here? She's got quite an imagination. But the neighbors weren't laughing. They looked concerned and uncomfortable. Some were whispering to each other. A few more had started recording with their phones. Morrison noticed the change in the crowd's mood and felt his confidence slipping slightly. But he was in too deep now to back down. He had to see this through, even if part of him was starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, this teenager was telling the truth. The thought scared him more than he wanted to admit. Mrs. Patterson had seen enough. While Officer Morrison continued his aggressive search of the car, and his partner stood by looking increasingly uncomfortable, she quietly slipped away from the crowd. She walked quickly to Zoe's house and rang the doorbell urgently. When no one answered, she remembered that Judge Williams was probably still at work. Mrs. Patterson had lived across the street for 12 years and had watched Zoe grow up. She knew the family well enough to have the judge's office number, which Zoe's mother had given to all the neighbors for emergencies. Meanwhile, back at the scene, Morrison was becoming more frustrated by the minute. Despite his thorough search of the vehicle, he had found absolutely nothing illegal. No drugs, no drug paraphernalia, not even an air freshener that might be used to hide smells. The car was clean, and the girls' shopping bags contained exactly what they appeared to contain: clothes and accessories from the mall. This is impossible, Morrison muttered to himself, still digging through the trunk. Maybe it's impossible because there's nothing to find, Zoe said firmly. She was standing with her arms crossed, trying to look braver than she felt. The whole situation had gone on for almost 30 minutes now, and she was getting worried that it might never end. Morrison slammed the trunk shut and walked back to the girls. You know what I think? I think you got lucky this time. I think you ditched whatever you had before I stopped you. Officer Morrison, Kira spoke up, her voice shaking slightly. We came straight from Westfield Mall. You can check the parking stub in my purse. We were there for 3 hours shopping. We drove straight here. We didn't stop anywhere else. Morrison grabbed Kira's purse and dumped it out on the hood of the car, just like he had done with their shopping bags. Wallet, keys, makeup, gum, hair ties, and indeed a parking stub from Westfield Mall scattered across the surface. He picked up the parking stub and examined it closely. It showed they had entered the mall parking garage at 11:30 a.m. and left at 2:45 p.m. It was now 3:15 p.m., which meant they had driven straight to this neighborhood after leaving the mall. Officer Chen walked over and looked at the stub too. Morrison, this backs up their story. They were at the mall all afternoon. So what? Morrison snapped. Drug deals happen at malls too. They could have bought something there. From who? Zoe asked. The sales clerks at the clothing stores? The teenagers working at the food court? Officer Morrison, you're reaching for any excuse to justify what you're doing to us. Morrison's face was getting red now. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by teenagers. I don't need to justify anything to you. I'm a police officer doing my job. Your job is to protect and serve, Zoe replied. How exactly are you protecting anyone by harassing 2 teenagers who were shopping at the mall? Before Morrison could answer, Mrs. Patterson came hurrying back across the street. She walked directly up to Officer Chen, who seemed like the more reasonable of the 2 officers. Officer, I called Judge Williams' office, she said quietly but loud enough for Morrison to hear. Her clerk said she was in court but that they would get her an emergency message immediately. Morrison spun around to face Mrs. Patterson. You did what? I called her office at the federal courthouse, Mrs. Patterson repeated, this time speaking directly to Morrison. I've known this family for years. Judge Patricia Williams is a lovely woman and a respected member of our community. For the first time since the stop began, Morrison looked genuinely nervous. Ma'am, you shouldn't have done that. This is police business. Harassing a federal judge's daughter is everyone's business, Mrs. Patterson replied firmly. Morrison's mind was racing. If this woman was telling the truth, if she really had called the federal courthouse, then this situation was about to become very complicated very quickly, but he had gone too far to back down now. His pride wouldn't let him. Look, he said to Mrs. Patterson, even if this girl's mother is who she claims to be, that doesn't put her above the law. I had reasonable suspicion to make this stop. Reasonable suspicion of what? Mrs. Patterson asked. I saw the whole thing from my yard. You stopped them for no reason and then started harassing them when you realized they were black girls in a nice neighborhood. The word black hung in the air like an accusation. Morrison felt the eyes of all the neighbors on him, and he didn't like what he saw in their expressions. This has nothing to do with race, he said defensively. This is about suspicious behavior. What suspicious behavior? Mr. Kim called out from where he was standing. I saw them driving normally down the street. They weren't speeding. They weren't driving erratically. They were just driving. Morrison was starting to feel surrounded. The crowd of neighbors was growing, and their mood was definitely not supportive of his actions. But he couldn't back down now. He had to see this through. Everyone needs to step back and let us do our job, he announced loudly. That's when they heard it. The sound of a car approaching fast. Everyone turned to look as a black sedan with government plates pulled up behind the police cars. The sedan's driver got out quickly and even from a distance. It was clear this was someone important. Judge Patricia Williams was still wearing her black judicial robes from the court session she had left abruptly. Her clerk had found her during a brief recess and delivered Mrs. Patterson's urgent message. She had immediately asked for a continuance and driven straight to the scene. Morrison watched as this tall, dignified woman approached the group. She moved with the kind of confidence that comes from years of commanding courtrooms and making decisions that affect people's lives. Her expression was calm but intense, like a storm gathering strength. Good afternoon, she said as she approached. Her voice was clear and authoritative. I'm Judge Patricia Williams. I understand you have my daughter in custody. Morrison's mouth went dry. The woman standing before him looked exactly like what a federal judge should look like. Professional, intelligent, and completely unimpressed with his authority. Ma'am, Morrison stammered. We were just conducting a routine traffic stop. Judge Williams looked around at the scene. She saw her daughter standing by the police car, looking upset but trying to stay strong. She saw Kira looking scared and close to tears. She saw their personal belongings scattered on the ground like trash. She saw the crowd of neighbors watching with concerned expressions. Officer Morrison, is it? She said, reading his name tag. Could you please explain to me what reasonable suspicion you had to stop these two young ladies? Morrison felt like a deer caught in headlights. Well, Your Honor, we had reports of suspicious activity in the area. What kind of suspicious activity? Drug-related activity, ma'am. Judge Williams raised an eyebrow. I see. And what specifically about my daughter and her friend made you suspect them of drug-related activity? Morrison realized he was in trouble. He couldn't say what he was really thinking. That two black teenagers in an expensive neighborhood looked suspicious to him. That would be admitting to racial profiling. They were driving slowly through the neighborhood, he said weakly. Driving slowly is suspicious? Well, no, but Officer Morrison, Judge Williams interrupted. How long have you been a police officer? 15 years, Your Honor. And in those 15 years, have you learned about the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution? Morrison felt sweat forming on his forehead. Yes, ma'am. The Fourth Amendment protects citizens from unreasonable searches and seizures, does it not? Yes, Your Honor. Judge Williams gestured toward the scattered belongings on the ground. Was searching through my daughter's personal property reasonable, given that driving slowly is not a crime? Morrison looked around desperately for support, but Officer Chen was studying his shoes and avoiding eye contact. The neighbors were watching silently and some were still recording with their phones. Your Honor. Morrison tried one more time. I was just doing my job. Judge Williams stepped closer to him, and Morrison felt very small despite being much larger than her. Officer Morrison, she said quietly but firmly. Let me explain something to you about your job. Your job is to protect and serve all citizens equally under the law. Your job is not to harass teenagers because you don't think they belong in a certain neighborhood. Do we understand each other? Morrison nodded weakly. He finally understood that this wasn't going to end well for him. Judge Williams reached into her purse and pulled out her federal identification badge and business card. She handed them to Officer Morrison, who took them with trembling hands. As he read the official federal seal and her credentials, what little color remained in his face completely drained away. United States Magistrate Judge Patricia Williams, Northern District, she said clearly. Appointed by President Obama, confirmed by the United States Senate, 7 years on the federal bench. Morrison stared at the credentials, then back at Judge Williams, then at Zoe. The resemblance was unmistakable now that he was really looking. They had the same intelligent eyes, the same strong jawline, the same confident posture. Your Honor, I didn't know, Morrison began. You didn't know because you didn't listen, Judge Williams replied firmly. My daughter told you repeatedly who I was. She gave you accurate information about my position, my background, and my appointment. But instead of listening, you chose to mock her. Officer Chen stepped forward. Your Honor, I want you to know that I advised Officer Morrison to handle this differently. I had concerns about the stop from the beginning. Judge Williams turned her attention to Chen. Officer Chen, is it? Were you present when my daughter's personal property was searched and scattered on the ground? Chen looked uncomfortable. Yes, ma'am. Did you have probable cause to believe there were illegal substances in their vehicle? No, ma'am. We found no evidence of any illegal activity. Yet you allowed the search to continue. You stood by while my daughter and her friend were humiliated in front of their neighbors. Is that correct? Chen's shoulders sagged. Yes, Your Honor. I should have spoken up more strongly. Judge Williams pulled out her phone and began taking pictures of the scene. She photographed the scattered belongings, the car with its doors still open, and the crowd of concerned neighbors. She also took pictures of both officers' badge numbers and their patrol car. Officer Morrison, she said as she documented everything, please explain to me your probable cause for this stop. Morrison looked around desperately. His earlier confidence had completely evaporated. Your Honor, we received reports of suspicious activity in the area. What reports? When were they made? Who made them? Morrison realized he had painted himself into a corner. There had been no reports. He had made that up to justify his actions. Well, Your Honor, it was more of a general awareness of increased activity in the area. General awareness is not probable cause, Officer Morrison. What specific articulable facts led you to believe these two young ladies were engaged in criminal activity? Morrison was quiet for a long moment. He couldn't think of a single fact that would justify his actions. Finally, he said quietly, I made an error in judgment, Your Honor. An error in judgment? Judge Williams' voice rose slightly. Officer Morrison, you detained two minors without cause. You searched their vehicle without consent or probable cause. You confiscated my daughter's phone without a warrant. You scattered their personal belongings on the ground like trash. You mocked and humiliated them in front of their community. This goes far beyond an error in judgment. Zoe stepped closer to her mother. Mom! He kept laughing when I told him who you were. He said I was making up stories and that I was delusional. Judge Williams' expression hardened. Is that true, Officer Morrison? Did you mock my daughter when she attempted to contact me? Morrison knew there was no point in lying now. Too many people had witnessed everything. Your Honor, Yes, I didn't believe her. You didn't believe her because a black teenager couldn't possibly be the daughter of a federal judge? Is that your reasoning? The racist implicati hung heavy in the air. Morrison's face flushed red. No, Your Honor, that's not. Then what exactly was your reasoning? What made her claim unbelievable to you? Morrison had no answer. The truth was that his assumptions had been based on racial bias, but he couldn't admit that out loud. Judge Williams turned to the crowd of neighbors. I want to thank everyone who witnessed this incident. Your presence and your recordings will be very important in the complaint I'm filing. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward. Judge Williams, I recorded some of it on my phone. And I want you to know that Officer Morrison specifically made comments about how federal judges don't live in this neighborhood. He said what? Judge Williams asked sharply. He said federal judges don't live in this neighborhood and their kids don't drive around in old cars, Mr. Kim added. Several of us heard it. Judge Williams turned back to Morrison. Did you make those statements, officer? Morrison realized his situation was getting worse by the minute. Your Honor, I may have made some inappropriate comments in the heat of the moment. Heat of the moment? Officer Morrison, this was a routine traffic stop that you escalated into harassment and humiliation. There was no heat of the moment until you created it. Judge Williams began typing notes on her phone as she spoke. I'm documenting everything for my formal complaints. I'll be filing reports with Internal Affairs, the Police Commissioner, and the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. Officer Chen looked alarmed. Your Honor, would it help if I filed my own report about what I observed? It would help, Officer Chen, but it won't undo the fact that you failed to protect these young ladies from harassment when you had the authority to do so. Morrison was starting to panic. He had been a police officer for 15 years and had never faced anything like this. Your Honor, is there anything I can do to make this right? Judge Williams studied him for a moment. Officer Morrison, you can start by returning my daughter's phone and helping clean up the mess you made of their belongings. Morrison quickly retrieved Zoe's phone from his patrol car and handed it to her. Then he and Officer Chen began picking up the scattered items and putting them back in the shopping bags. Your Honor, Morrison said as he worked, I want to apologize to you and to your daughter and her friend. I made serious mistakes today. Your apology is noted, Officer Morrison, but apologies don't erase constitutional violations. My daughter will carry the memory of this humiliation for the rest of her life. She'll remember being treated like a criminal in her own neighborhood. She'll remember having her belongings scattered on the ground like trash. She'll remember grown men laughing at her when she tried to exercise her rights. Zoe looked up at her mother with tears in her eyes. Mom, I tried to do everything you taught me. I asked for badge numbers. I tried to stay calm. I knew my rights. Judge Williams put her arm around her daughter. You did everything perfectly, sweetheart. You were brave and smart and strong. This is not your fault. This is about adults who failed to do their jobs properly. She turned back to Morrison. Officer Morrison, my daughter did exactly what every citizen should do when dealing with law enforcement. She was respectful. She knew her rights and she provided truthful information. Your response was to mock her and violate those rights. That tells me this department needs significant retraining. Morrison finished gathering the last of the scattered items. Your Honor, what happens now? Now, Officer Morrison, you and your partner are going to return to your station and file accurate reports about this incident. I'm going to take my daughter home and then spend the evening writing very detailed complaints to multiple agencies. And tomorrow, this community is going to start having serious conversations about police accountability and constitutional rights. As Judge Williams spoke, more neighbors had gathered. The crowd now included people of all ages and backgrounds, and they were all listening intently to every word. I want everyone here to understand something, Judge Williams said, addressing the crowd. What happened here today wasn't just about my daughter. This kind of treatment happens to young people in our community regularly. The only difference is that my position gave me the power to respond effectively. But every citizen, regardless of their family's job or status, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect by law enforcement. The neighbors nodded in agreement. Several called out words of support. Judge Williams looked at Morrison one last time. Officer Morrison, I hope you'll use this experience to become a better police officer. But understand that there will be consequences for your actions today. Significant consequences. With that, she guided Zoe and Kira toward their car, leaving Morrison to contemplate just how drastically his career was about to change. Judge Williams spent that entire evening at her kitchen table, writing the most detailed complaint she had ever prepared. She documented every moment of the incident, every violation of constitutional rights, and every witness statement. By midnight, she had completed formal complaints to the Police Internal Affairs Division, the City Police Commissioner, the Mayor's Office, and the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. The next morning, before most people were even awake, Judge Williams was on the phone. Her first call was to the Police Commissioner, whom she had worked with on several community policing initiatives. The conversation was brief and to the point. Commissioner Rodriguez, this is Judge Williams. I'm calling about a serious incident involving Officer Morrison, badge number 4772, yesterday afternoon. Commissioner Rodriguez had already received Judge Williams' formal complaint via email. Judge Williams, I read your report first thing this morning. I want you to know we're taking this very seriously. I hope so, Commissioner. Because this isn't just about my daughter. This kind of behavior suggests systemic problems that need immediate attention. Within 2 hours of that phone call, Officer Morrison was called into the commissioner's office. When he arrived, he found not just Commissioner Rodriguez, but also the Chief of Internal Affairs and the department's legal counsel. Officer Morrison, Commissioner Rodriguez began, "We've reviewed the incident from yesterday afternoon, including body camera footage, witness statements, and civilian video recordings. Your actions violated multiple department policies and constitutional protections." Morrison sat silently as they went through the list. Unlawful detention, illegal search, confiscation of property without cause, discriminatory policing, and conduct unbecoming an officer. Effective immediately, Commissioner Rodriguez continued, "You are suspended without pay pending a full internal affairs investigation. You will surrender your weapon and badge now." The investigation that followed was thorough and swift. The department's body cameras had recorded much of the incident, and the civilian cell phone videos filled in the gaps. The evidence was overwhelming. Officer Chen, who had cooperated fully with the investigation, received a written reprimand and was required to complete additional training on constitutional rights and intervention procedures. He kept his job, but the incident became a permanent part of his record. Officer Morrison faced much more serious consequences. After a 2-week investigation, he was terminated from the police force. The department cited multiple policy violations and determined that his actions were incompatible with professional law enforcement standards, but the story didn't end with Morrison's firing. Judge Williams had made it clear that this incident represented broader systemic issues, and she intended to address them comprehensively. 3 weeks after the incident, she was invited to speak at a city council meeting about police reform. The council chambers were packed with community members, many of whom had witnessed the original incident or heard about it from neighbors. "Council members," Judge Williams began, "what happened to my daughter could happen to any young person in our city. The difference is that my position gave me the knowledge and resources to respond effectively. But constitutional rights aren't just for federal judges' children. They belong to every citizen." She proposed a comprehensive reform package, mandatory training on constitutional rights for all officers, body cameras for every patrol unit, civilian oversight of police misconduct investigations, and regular community policing workshops. "We need officers who see themselves as guardians of the community, not occupying forces," she explained. "We need training that emphasizes de-escalation and respect for civil rights. And we need accountability systems that actually hold officers responsible for their actions." The City Council voted unanimously to implement Judge Williams' recommendations. The police department would receive additional funding for training and equipment, but it would come with strict oversight requirements. 6 months later, the changes were already visible. The police academy had revised its training curriculum to include extensive civil rights education. New officers now spent weeks learning about constitutional protections and community engagement before they ever hit the streets. Officer Chen became one of the department's leading advocates for the new training programs. His experience during the incident with Zoe had fundamentally changed his perspective on policing. He volunteered to share his story with new recruits, explaining how standing by silently during misconduct had nearly cost him his career. "I learned that being a good police officer means more than just following orders," he told a class of new recruits. "It means speaking up when something is wrong, even if it's uncomfortable, especially if it's uncomfortable." As for Morrison, he struggled to find new employment. The termination from the police force, along with the widely reported nature of his misconduct, made it difficult to get hired anywhere in law enforcement. He eventually found work as a security guard at a shopping mall, earning a fraction of his former police salary. Judge Williams continued her advocacy work. Speaking at police academies and community meetings throughout the region, she became a nationally recognized voice for police reform, always emphasizing that accountability and respect for rights made communities safer for everyone. Zoe, meanwhile, had been profoundly affected by the experience. Initially, she felt angry and distrustful of police officers, but her mother helped her channel those feelings into positive action. "What happened to you was wrong," Judge Williams told her daughter one evening, "but now you have a choice. You can let it make you bitter, or you can use it to help make things better for other people." Zoe chose to make things better. She joined her school's debate team and wrote her senior thesis on civil rights and police accountability. She spoke at community meetings alongside her mother, sharing her perspective as a young person who had experienced police misconduct. "I want other kids to know their rights," Zoe told one audience. "I want them to know they don't have to accept being treated badly just because they're young. And I want officers to remember that every person they stop is someone's child." During her senior year of high school, Zoe was accepted to several prestigious universities. She chose to attend her mother's alma mater, Harvard, where she planned to study law with a focus on civil rights. "I want to be a lawyer like my mom," she told a reporter who was writing a follow-up story about the incident. "But I want to specialize in helping people who don't have the advantages I had. People who need someone to fight for them when their rights are violated." The incident had one more lasting impact. Mrs. Patterson and the other neighbors who had witnessed everything became much more engaged in community policing efforts. They formed a neighborhood watch group that focused not just on crime prevention, but on police accountability. "We realized that day that we can't just stand by and watch when something wrong is happening," Mrs. Patterson explained. "Whether it's crime or police misconduct, we all have a responsibility to speak up." 2 years after the incident, Judge Williams received a letter from a young law student who had heard her speak at a conference. The student wrote about being stopped by police in a similar situation, but this time the outcome was different. "I knew my rights because I had heard your story," the student wrote. "When I told the officer I wanted to call my parent, he let me. When I asked for his badge number, he gave it to me respectfully. The whole interaction was professional and appropriate. I think your advocacy work is really making a difference." Judge Williams shared the letter with Zoe, who was now in her sophomore year at Harvard. They both smiled as they read it. "You know what this means?" Judge Williams asked her daughter. "What?" "It means that what happened to you actually helped prevent it from happening to someone else. That police officer probably had better training because of the reforms we pushed for. That student knew their rights because of the awareness we helped create." Zoe nodded thoughtfully. "So something good really did come out of that awful day." "Something very good," her mother agreed. "Change is slow, but it's real. And every person who gets treated with dignity by police officers, every young person who knows their rights, every officer who thinks twice before acting inappropriately, that's all part of your legacy." As Judge Williams looked at her daughter, she felt immense pride, not just because Zoe was smart and successful, but because she had taken a traumatic experience and transformed it into a force for positive change. The scared 15-year-old who had stood up to Officer Morrison had grown into a confident young woman who was determined to make the justice system work better for everyone. The incident that had started with harassment and humiliation had become a catalyst for real reform, proving that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope for justice and change.